When the Golden State Warriors lost Kevin Durant in the 2019 offseason, this coming off of a loss in the finals to the Toronto Raptors, and with Klay Thompson also suffering an injury that would keep him out for the 2019-20 season, it was thought that by many that the Warriors would never win an NBA title with their current big three of Steph, Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green. All three of those guys were getting older, injuries were starting to become a factor when considering their long-term health, and of course, they lost arguably their best player in Kevin Durant. We knew they would still be a good team, but not a title contending team with their core heading into their early to mid 30s, and also just the increasingly competitive Western Conference that they would have to go up against. But come last season, the Golden Warriors shocked the NBA world by winning their fourth championship after having missed the playoffs the year prior, and also doing so without Klay Thompson for the first half of the season. And because of this run, the Warriors proved all their doubters wrong that they could still win despite the big three no longer having their youth like they did when they won their first title in 2015, and also not having Kevin Durant. The Warriors were considered to be one of the title favorites to win the championship this upcoming season, but what most people failed to realize was that while the Warriors kept their main core, their best players intact on the roster, they were unable to retain crucial role players from last year's title run that were often overlooked and underappreciated for the impact they had on the court, and it very well could be the biggest mistake the Warriors made in preventing them from winning their fifth title in just 8 years. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe, as this is a newly created channel from just a few weeks ago, and I would also appreciate any feedback you guys have on the content and topics you would like to see for the future. Let me know in the comments. Now, last season, what made the Golden State Warriors particularly special, aside from the incredible shows of offense we were able to see from Steph Curry on a nightly basis, the flow and pace for which they played was a thing of beauty, but what was more impressive was just how great the Warriors were on the defensive end for a team that previously wasn't as well known for their defense, even though they were still always a good defensive team, especially in their earlier championship years. The Warriors finished the season first in the league in defensive rating and third in the league in points allowed to their opponent. This compared to their last championship run, in which they were 11th on defense. Surprisingly, the Warriors were 17th in terms of offensive rating last season, which was their lowest offensive rating of all their championship seasons. And as much as everyone boasts about the Warriors' three-point shooting, a team that really revolutionized the game with their focus on the three ball, they actually were 8th in the league in three-point shooting, just 36%, and 10th in the league in overall field goal percentage, which further speaks volumes to their defensive impact on the court and what made them such a threat in their playoff run on the way to a title. But like every championship team, going into the offseason can be a challenge in maintaining their roster, with players expecting big paydays for helping secure a ring. And the national exposure, championship experience garners a lot of interest from teams across the league to offer big paydays to players who are set to become free agents, particularly role players on said championship teams who maybe weren't as appreciated as much as team star players were, or just simply because the championship team doesn't have the requisite cap space to pay and retain their role players. And that was exactly the case with the Golden State Warriors this past offseason. Now, give the Warriors owner Joe Lacob a ton of credit. He is by no means cheap in spending the most he possibly can to make his team great. He has no problem paying an insane amount of luxury tax if it means they have a team that can compete for a title, unlike a lot of other franchises who are very stingy. But even despite all of that, it doesn't matter how much the Warriors are willing to spend. Unlike in baseball, the NBA has a salary cap, a luxury tax threshold for which you cannot exceed, so inevitably sacrifices have to be made where there is only so much money to go around, especially when some players are outperforming their current salaries and are going to require bigger paydays. And in there lies the problem with the Golden State Warriors and why you're seeing them get off to a slow start. The guys that were free agents or players going into expiring deals that were extension eligible last year: Otto Porter, Gary Payton Jr., or I guess I should say Gary Payton II, Juan Toscano Anderson, Damian Lee, Kevon Looney, and Andre Iguodala, who were all free agents going into the offseason, and Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins being extension eligible, Poole being extension eligible on his rookie scale deal. Now, you also have to understand that the Warriors' big three of Steph, Klay, and Draymond are on very large contracts on a per-year salary basis, which take up a bulk of their salary cap. Steph's salary going into the season was a cool $48 million. Klay Thompson is getting $40.6 million, and Draymond Green $25.8 million. Now, we can debate these contracts all we want and say whether these guys are worth those amounts given their age and injury history, but the fact of the matter is, These are their contracts, and they can't just be renegotiated whether it was an overpay after the fact or not. Klay Thompson still has one more year left on his deal after this season, as does Draymond Green if he exercises his player option for the final year of his deal. Otherwise, he'll be an unrestricted free agent this upcoming offseason, which many have speculated he could opt out as he's looking for a higher payday or at least a more long-term guaranteed deal. And then for Steph Curry, his contract extends all the way through 2026 when he's going to be 37 years old. I know I'm probably in the minority in this opinion, but that contract could start to look very unfavorable in the final year or two of that deal, as Steph, as great as he is and continues to dominate the league well into his 30s, showing no signs of decline, getting paid close to $60 million at 37 is likely going to put the Warriors in a pinch as it relates to their future and managing their salary cap. I get why you have to do it because Steph Curry has done so much for that franchise and was actually underpaid at the beginning of his career, and without Steph, the Warriors don't become the dynasty that you see today. So he's absolutely worth that kind of money just based on the sheer value and money and revenue he has brought to the organization over his tenure. Like, really, you could argue Steph is underpaid when you think about how much alone he has increased the value of that franchise in the last 10 years. But it still could be a situation where it leaves the Warriors a little hamstrung by the end of his contract, especially if Steph starts experiencing any injuries as he heads into his late 30s. So because of the locked-in contracts of the Big Three, it doesn't leave a ton of money left on the table to retain all of their free agents going into the season. And so what do the Warriors do? Well, they re-signed Kevon Looney to a fairly team-friendly deal, 3-year deal worth $25.5 million, which I think actually is a good deal. Looney was hugely impactful for the Warriors in the playoffs, especially in the Western Conference Finals series against Dallas. Like, he's kind of the perfect fit as a starting center for that roster that likes to play small ball and just needs a big body that can get them rebounds playing around 20 minutes per game. That's what Looney offers. So paying Looney should have been a priority for the Warriors, and that amount is fine given he's in his prime, only 26, and a low rate relative to his production compared to some other players in the league. The Warriors also re-signed Andre Iguodala to a 1-year, $1.8 million vet minimum deal, which I mean is whatever. He hasn't played so far this year. Sure, it's good to have that veteran leadership and presence, and it's only a 1-year deal, so I can live with it. Although I think even that little amount of money should have been spent elsewhere, which I'll get into. They let Bjelica go, which is fine. That makes sense. They let Damian Lee go. He signs a 1-year deal with the Suns. I don't consider that a big loss, although he was a decent scorer for them coming off the bench. They let Toscano walk. He signs a min deal with the Lakers. I'm also fine with that, as he wasn't really getting very much playing time anyway, barely played in the playoffs. But the biggest losses that I take issue with, that should have been prioritized more so than some of the other guys who got paid, was Gary Payton Jr. and Otto Porter, and particularly Gary Payton, who I'll start with. Look, I know he hasn't played yet this season, and who knows what he'll pan out to be for the Portland Trail Blazers, but Gary Payton's impact for the Warriors last season cannot be understated. First of all, Gary Payton is one of the hardest workers out there. His journey alone in getting to the NBA was not an easy one. Not a high-level recruit, was undrafted, had to work his way to getting training camp invites, signed multiple two-way deals, 10-day contracts, until finally last season, he found his stride with the Warriors. I know he's not the best offensive player, not a high-volume shooter, although I do still think it's impressive that for his size, he shot 61% from the field, even if it was only on 3 attempts per game. But where his impact resides is on the defensive end. He takes after his dad in being the glove. He pesters ball handlers, picks their pockets. Per 36 minutes, he averaged 2.8 steals per game last year. Per 100 possessions, he averaged 3.8. Those are some of the highest steal rates in the league on those per adjustment metrics, and it was the highest for the Warriors as a team, the highest by a significant margin. And what's often overlooked because it's not a typical stat that is looked at was his deflections per game, his ability to force turnovers, his ability to get in the passing lanes and enable fast break transition plays. His on-court, off-court numbers speak for themselves. Finished the season with a defensive box plus minus of 3.4, a total box plus minus of 3.7. The only player that had a higher box plus minus than Gary Payton for the Warriors last season was Steph Curry. That's it. No one else had a better on-court impact than Gary Payton. Granted, keep in mind his minutes and usage are lower than guys who were in the starting lineup, but when he was on the court, he was making a big difference for the Warriors. Oh, and he also had the highest value over a replacement player on the Warriors, with the exception of Steph Curry. I know some people don't like advanced metrics, even myself, I critique them at times, but there is something to be said when you see these eye-popping numbers in the times when Payton was on the court. Now sure, Gary Payton probably got a little overpaid by the Blazers. That's what happens when you play well on a championship level team, and the Warriors knew they likely weren't going to be able to retain him. But 3 years, $26 million isn't that much when you see how well he fit on the Warriors and that system that they should have tried to match the offer and maybe given Jordan Poole a little bit less, which I'll get into. Then you have Otto Porter, who his impact wasn't as high as someone like Gary Payton's coming off the bench, but where Porter's value resides, again, fits perfectly in the Warriors system, is he's the definition of a 3-and-D guy. Plays tough defense, shoots well to help spread the floor, averaged 8.2 points per game and 5.7 rebounds last season coming off the bench for the Warriors. His per 36 and per 100 possessions actually demonstrates even further how efficient he is on offense. And again, on-court, off-court numbers don't lie. Porter was 4th on the Warriors in box plus minus, only behind Steph, Gary Payton, and Draymond Green, and also 4th in value over replacement player, also behind the same guys I just mentioned. And look, I get it, Otto Porter isn't a make or break signing that's going to change the outlook of their season, but he was an important role player that provided a scoring spark off the bench and solid defense. And Porter, who's 29, signed a 2-year, $12.3 million contract with the Raptors. Like, if you're wary about matching the figure of Gary Payton and what he was given, especially as it relates to ensuring, other players get paid, at least try and retain Otto Porter on a cheap deal. It's not like he's 35 years old. He hasn't even hit 30 yet. So of course, leading up to the start of the season, the Warriors made it clear who they are going to prioritize for the future when they offered both Andrew Wiggins and Jordan Poole contract extensions on the same day. Wiggins, 4 years, $109 million, and Poole, 4 years, $140 million. If you caught one of my first videos I had on the channel a couple weeks back talking about some of the worst offseason signings in the NBA, you saw I included Jordan Poole in that group because, well, I think Poole is a great player and was huge for the Warriors and stepping up in a big way when Klay Thompson was out, and when Klay came back, he was still great. He still served as a very reliable scorer coming off the bench. And as much as I think he's great and still is going to continue getting better as he's only 23 and hasn't even entered his prime yet, the fact of the matter is you're paying Jordan Poole star level money as a franchise cornerstone for the future when Steph and Klay head off into the sunset. And as good as Poole is and has been, I have a hard time seeing him being an all-star level player, a guy who can lead the Warriors into their next chapter. Jordan Poole is a pretty undersized shooting guard. He's a great scorer, but I wouldn't call him an elite scorer. He's not the best three-point shooter, even though he takes high volume of threes. Last season, he shot 36% from three on 7.6 attempts. This season, only 10 games in, but even worse, shooting 31% on 7 attempts from three. He's not a good rebounder because of his size, and more recently, has been committing a lot of turnovers at a much higher rate with his overall usage increasing. Last season, Poole was a negative in defensive box plus minus and overall 1 in box plus minus as a whole, which was 8th on the team compared to Payton and Porter, who were 2nd and 4th respectively. Again, usage numbers are different. I know Poole played more minutes than both of those guys, but it's something to keep in mind that while yes, Poole is great and fits the Warriors system well, you gave him a massive contract to come off the bench and eventually be one of your franchise cornerstones, while you overlooked the most important, impactful role players that really rounded out the roster. Andrew Wiggins I'm not as fussed about because Wiggins was honestly the second best player on that Warriors team most of the year. He was a first-time All-Star, has turned himself into a very nice two-way player, and he's only 27, so for his production and age, 4 years, $109 million is actually right around market value. If anything, he's probably being a little underpaid. But here's what gets me. You didn't need to do an early contract extension for either of these guys. Yes, obviously you don't want to risk having these guys becoming unrestricted free agents and you're not able to pay them, and if they have stellar seasons because of your limited cap space, and then you risk them leaving for nothing. But why not give these guys another year to prove their value? And I'm really just talking about Poole because, as I said, I think Wiggins' extension was actually a good deal. But for Jordan Poole especially, you did not have to extend him this offseason because he actually would have been a restricted free agent if you did not reach an extension, which means you could have let the market dictate what he's worth and then match any offer sheet. And in a season when the salary cap across the league is increasing, and then that could have afforded you to see how Poole actually does in the upcoming season to see if he's worth giving $140 million to, and then maybe you're able to give a smaller contract to either Gary Payton Jr. or Otto Porter based on the deals they received over the offseason. Or if you felt the strong need to extend Poole now, maybe negotiate a lower offer that would have enabled you to retain those key role players. Obviously, I have no idea what negotiations went on behind the scenes. Maybe they did in fact try to offer him something like 4 years, $100 million, and his agent just said hell no. But either way, you're seeing some of the ramifications of the Warriors not prioritizing keeping some of their valuable role players and instead, in my opinion, overpaying a guy who they perceive to be a future star, which so far this season has shown anything but that. Again, it's early. I don't have any doubt that the Warriors will get together and they're still going to be one of the better teams in the league, but reclaiming their title, I see that being a tall order based on the construction of this roster at this point, which, by the way, it also doesn't help that Draymond Green punched Jordan Poole, and I'm sure that's probably impacted the younger players' trust of him, but honestly, I think that's actually more of a minor aspect of their underperformance so far this season. You guys let me know what you think in the comments with all of this. Be sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.